Okay, so here we are in lab. So different from lecture. So we talked about bits and bytes, and you should have an idea of what they are now. Some of you already knew. But when we talk about information overload, there are some comparisons that we can draw with the human mind and a computer. So for instance, and this is an estimate because we can't narrow this down. Some people have more capability than others, but our brain can process about 120 bits of information per second, which doesn't really mean very much unless we can give a literal kind of an example. How much does it take? How many bits per second is somebody talking to you, for instance? So if you're having if somebody is talking to you and you're listening to someone, so it's not really a conversation, you're listening actively. My foot is wrapped around a cord here, let me move it. We're using about 60 bits per second. That's why it becomes very difficult to figure out when two people are talking to you at the same time, what's going on, because we've kind of maxed out our brain's power. Because like I said, it's about 120 bits per second. So 2 times 60 is 120, so we're kind of maxed out, which basically means that we're not really able to, well, we're just barely able to recognize both conversations and try to keep track of them. So when we're talking about information overload, what happens when we get more than our capacity? So when there are, say, 3 people talking, 4 people talking, our brains tend to shut things out, and so we focus. So if there's a group of people talking, we try to focus on one person because our brain is having a reaction to too much information coming in, and so we automatically try to narrow that. So when you're watching TV and somebody's talking, right, you can kind of watch TV and listen, but you know, somebody's trying to talk to you, you're watching television, and then somebody else tries to, you know, is yelling at you from the other room, trying to get you to listen to them. Then it's like we have to actually focus and take one of those sources out of the equation so that we can actually hear and understand what's going on. So you focus on one person and then you may have to go back to the other person and say, hey, what happened? What did you say? And then when you go and watch the, you know, go back to your television, you go, what happened? So you might have to rewind. Most of us have that capability now, right, to figure out what happened. So information overload just means that there's so much stuff coming in that we can't figure it out. Now, the other meaning of information overload is that we're getting information in all the time, which makes it, and we talked about this last time, I think, which makes it more difficult for our brains because we have to make decisions about, is this piece of information important or not? We have to then make a decision whether this is important. And the more stuff we have in, the less capable we are of, or our brains kind of get fatigued by making the decision whether it's important information or not. So we get worse as time goes on. In the morning, after you've had your stimulant, your cup of coffee, or whatever it is that you do in the morning, not when you first wake up, but when we're first kind of ready for the day, we are really good. We're attentive. We understand what people are saying. By the end of the day, we tend to be in worse shape So it's like, oh, at the end of the day, it's like, oh, what, huh? You have more trouble focusing on stuff. And even one person's conversation, you might have, you may be watching television and listening to somebody and you have problems with that. Just because throughout the day, our brains have become fatigued with too much stuff coming in. So humans tend to shut down, our decision-making processes as time goes on. The more information that we're getting, our brains try to limit the fatigue, and it's just a natural reaction. You have to focus more, or actively try to focus more, to be the same as you were, say, at 11 o'clock in the morning or noon. To have that same, it didn't take as much effort. So what does that mean? In practical purposes, it basically means that because this is the society that we live in, this is the technology environment that we live in, we should take some common sense approaches to things. So for instance, if you go to a grocery store, make a list. And you can use your electronic device to make the list, make a list or take notes or whatever it is that you say. And then you say, hey, I need milk, I need this, right? So that when you're actually at the grocery store and you're distracted by other things as the day goes on, right? You can actually remember what it is that you need. You make a list of the things that you're supposed to do today. And again, because we have the knowledge that our brains get fatigued, it's better, and I know this is hard to do, but it's better to study or do homework earlier in the day than it is later in the day. We have to work around the environment that we live in.
Excuse me, Professor?
Yeah, go ahead.
Be based off of the type of person that you are, though, not rather every person is the same?
Now, obviously not everybody is the same. And so, again, it's one of those things where we have some concrete facts. So we know that it's harder to concentrate and it's harder for our brains to focus later in a day. And just because our brains have been bombarded by all kinds of trivial information, important information, and as time goes on, we find it harder and harder or our brains find it harder to focus. And at some point, our bodies, we get fatigued that's why we go to sleep at night. Or I say at night, but we sleep, at some point. I know a guy who works actually my niece's boyfriend. He works like a graveyard shift. So he sleeps during the day. So obviously, once he wakes up, if he wakes up at 3 in the afternoon or 4 in the afternoon, he's sharper then, right? So obviously, it's your own cycle. But when we wake up, after we wake up, say, give it an hour after we're up, that's when we tend to be the most, or able to focus the most, or 2 hours. Again, everybody is unique and individual, but I talk in generalities. So we have to kind of adapt that to our own unique situation. So, if you work a graveyard shift, or a lot of times people who work out, like if you work out every day, you feel really good after you work out. So you're able to concentrate at that point. Give it a half an hour after you work out, you take a shower, now, hey, I feel really good. So, but the general information still holds true. Right? In general, our brains get more fatigued the more information and the more kind of decision-making processes we have to go through during the day. Does that make sense? Jordan, does that make sense? It was Jordan that was talking to me, right?
Yes, that was me. Yes, it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know, did you have some kind of specific example maybe that would help the rest of us, or?
Well, specifically for me, I usually do my homework later on in the evening,
Mhm.
especially when it comes with technical homework. I just feel more energized at night rather than in the morning. Um,
Well, there are other things in our environment, right?
yeah, and the
So,
same thing goes with working out. Like when I
mhm.
can't really work out in the morning because I don't have like the energy in the morning, but like when I work out toward like the afternoon and evening, I have a lot more energy. So
Okay, well, that's your own body telling you, what's going on. It's kind of your own cycle. But uh, what I was going to say was, we have other things that are in our environment that we also need to take into consideration. So, for instance, how much distraction is there during the day? Do we have chores or things, work or things that we need to do um, that will distract us from doing, homework or other things? A lot of people feel rested and relaxed in the early evening, right? And so that used to be the time after dinner, kind of. I get really tired. After dinner, I'm useless. Um, but a lot of people can study, later at night. I know also that we tend to, as human beings, also, for a lot of us, we're procrastinators. So we tend to wait, and that becomes a habit. And so when you try to break that and do stuff at different times, it's very difficult to do. So um, we just have to be aware that our brains all kind of work the same way. And so if you've been, like, for instance, when you go to class and you listen to a lecture and you've written notes, and then you go to another class and you listen to another lecture, and then you go to another class. Let's say you have 4 classes. By the time the last class rolls around, your brain is fatigued unless you've had a good break in between, right? But if you try to go, boom, 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 boom. So I don't know if you remember elementary school, but a lot of times they will do stuff in the morning before noon. And then in the afternoon, you have, after lunch, you have less technical things that you have to deal with. And again, it's because, over time, our brains get fatigued. And now, if you're, I don't know what your situation is in general, but, there are always exceptions to every rule. But these are things that we need to be aware of. The generalities typically work. We tend to be sharper at a certain point in time before we've, if you're a car mechanic and you work on cars all day long and you start at 8 o'clock in the morning, you're probably better at 11 o'clock than you are, at 4 o'clock when it's an hour before you go home. Just because you're like, oh, I'm tired of this, I'm tired of doing it. You're doing something over and over again. You probably take better notes in the earlier classes, or the classes, not earlier, but the classes you have first than the ones you have last, unless it's a super interesting topic or you're really interested in the class. So in general, we need to actively focus more and know these limits, right? I know that I'm going to be fatigued and that my brain, not me, but my brain is going to be fatigued, and it's going to be an unconscious kind of a thing that happens. And so because we have the information, we can make a decision to try to focus more and be more actively involved. And I'll give you a hint for classes. Be more engaged, ask questions, or when professors ask you something, comment or try to answer the questions. It forces us to become more involved. In a traditional classroom setting, sit at the front of the class instead of at the back. Again, this is kind of proven. People who sit in the front do better in their classes in general than people who sit in the back of a classroom. And the reason is because you're more involved just by being physically closer to your teacher or professor. Now, I know I used to always sit in the back too, except for classes that I really wasn't interested in, and then I'd force myself to sit up front. And again, that was a conscious decision on my part, saying, you know what, I'm going to sit up front because then I'm going to be forced to pay attention because the professor's eyes are going to be on me all the time. So I can't jack around on my phone, you know, having it down below the desk here, because the professor's going to see it. So it kind of, it's a conscious way to keep ourselves from doing the things that we know will cause us to be distracted. Does that make sense to everybody? Does it make sense to anybody, I should ask?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good. And again, it's kind of a common sense thing. So again, everybody's a little bit different, but it is proven that people who sit up front in general, there have been many studies on this, people that sit in front generally do better than the people who sit in the back. I'm not saying that if you sit in the back, you're failing all of your classes. That's not what the research says. But you know, and so like I remember taking this business law class, and I just didn't care, but I forced myself to sit up front every class. And it helps. It helps focus you. You have to use whatever kind of methodology that you can when you know, because nobody knows us like we do ourselves, right? And I knew for this class, I really couldn't give a crap. And so I'm going to do everything, right? I'd much rather be on my phone, or I'd much rather, you know, be reading something else, reading, you know, the old thing where you have your book up, you get a comic book inside. You know, I'd much rather be doing that. But again, I was in college and I was like, I'm paying for this class. I need this class. I need to pass this class because I certainly don't want to take it again. This is the last thing I want. So I might as well, you know, torture myself, force myself to do as well as I possibly can. It was always the first class that I studied for. I forced myself to take notes, conscious effort to overcome kind of the things, the apathy, the procrastination, the, you know, I always say, you know, the first day of class, everybody's like, oh, I'm going to get an A in this class. I'm going to do really well. I'm enthusiastic. By the time, you know, you start getting to the end of a semester or a quarter, everybody's like, oh, okay, so what do I need to get a B? Right? What do I need to pass this class to get a C? So our expectations drop as we go through, and now we're saying, hey, instead of getting an A and doing really well, I'm just going to settle for whatever it is that I can possibly get. And so knowing that, we can take steps to actively counteract that. So hopefully that makes sense. Ooh, Patrick is like stopped somewhere now. He's no longer in the car. Yeah, we're going to just keep track of where you are at any given moment, Patrick. I can see you're not in a car anymore. By the way, I am recording this lecture and or this lab, so I'll post both the lecture and the lab. So if you missed parts of it or you need it, it'll be there. Okay. So having said that, so we can have our own strategies once we understand what information overload does to our brains. We can create our own individual strategies to deal with that. And by the way, Jordan, one more thing that comes to mind is that we can also train ourselves to, you know, this is my study time. This is my workout time. And then we have a routine. So sometimes, or a lot of times, routines help us too. And one thing that's important is to try to focus like a laser beam. So whenever you sit down to study or to get work done, homework done, it's always a good idea to minimize distractions. So have a place to study. Don't have the television on. Music is one thing, this way or that. Some people, like music. Other people find it a distraction. So that's, again, kind of an individual choice. I always like to have music on in the background. Not blaring, but kind of, I guess it soothes, it soothes some of us to have some kind of not total quiet. Because when it's totally quiet, at least for me, and somebody says something, then I'm really drawn to whatever it is that they're saying. So I get distracted. But we should have a place where we can go so we don't hear the television, or we don't hear what people are doing or their conversations, and we get distracted. So you create your own environment. You can create a routine. Those are things that also studies show help us maximize our brain. So having said that, when we go back to talking about critical thinking and knowing some of the things that, information overload, how much our brains can handle, one conversation, two conversations at the same time, max, when we're fresh, whenever that might be. We also know that as we make more meaningless or not meaningless, but more trivial decisions during the day, our decision-making capability deteriorates. We can also, and these are all things that we can, and I talked about it, consciously try to counteract or make work for us. So the other thing I want to talk about today is, so are there any questions, or are we good on that? Because I want to talk about groupthink. What time is it? Yeah. Which we already talked about a little bit, but I want to talk about groupthink in a more detailed kind of a way. Oh, Samantha said, thank you. You're welcome, Samantha. I'm not sure why you're thanking me.
Because you said you would upload the lectures.
Oh, okay. No, I just looked over at my chat room, so that was a while ago, and I was like, oh, why are you thanking me? Just for being so good. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, you're welcome. No, I'll do that every time. So having said that, let's talk about what groupthink is. So I mentioned it before a little bit. So tell me what groupthink is. You tell me, or what you think it is. Go.
Like collaboration within a group together.
Okay.
Yeah, what Angelina said, just collaborative thinking. That's it.
Okay. So working in a group isn't groupthink. Working in a group means that we're collaborating with others. So ideally, that means that our ideas are separate and we kind of meld them together. That's, I think, where you were going, Angelina, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So having said that, group think is a little bit different than that. So let's take a guess as what group think might be. And if you look at group think a little bit in a negative light, it may be easier for you to come up with the answers. And I'm not just talking to you, Angelina.
Like creating a thought or bias based off of how a particular group thinks.
Again, that's kind of collaboration and working in a group. which isn't really negative or positive. Any group, decision-making as a group, again, is collaboration. Neo said we all think to produce one idea. That's getting close. Giving each other ideas to come up with a uniform idea that's agreeable to somebody. But remember that I said that it has a bit of a negative connotation. So it's a bit bad. When everyone thinks the same way, is close, because everybody doesn't think the same way, even though we're working in a group, right? We may, when we come up, let's say that we're working in a group. When we come up with let's say we're trying to solve some kind of problem, and we come up with an answer, that answer is the one that everybody kind of agrees with, or maybe not even agrees with, but just doesn't have, yeah, that's fine, right? Doesn't have a big objection to. So groupthink is kind of a trap that we fall into when we are working with groups of people. Our brains, again, it's kind of an unconscious thing that happens. So our brains, it's kind of like one person leads what the group does. Well, yes, it's usually a group of people, a couple of people will take the lead, and then others will kind of follow, even if they have kind of objections to what's going on. And groupthink basically means that the individuals in the group, everybody kind of desires to have a consensus. Everybody wants to come to a consensus. We should, like, okay, so we want to solve problem A, right? And a couple of people have some ideas, and kind of we hash those out, and then very soon there becomes a focus point, and pretty soon all other ideas are kind of distractions. And what happens when we work in a group and when we are together in a group is that we subconsciously want to come to a decision or to come solve the problem. And so we have a kind of an innate desire to come to a consensus, even when it might be bad, it might not be the right answer. If enough people agree, so let's say there are 20 of us and we're working on something and 5 people agree, and then a couple more people agree with them, and then pretty soon 10 people agree, and then you hash it out a little bit more, and then, you know, we have 15 out of the 20 people that are kind of agreeing, they're getting a consensus, and you may still have some strong disagreements. And again, depending on, you know, this could be hours and we get tired and then we're just sitting there and we're like, okay, yeah, I'll agree, whatever. And we've all been in that situation where, you know, at some point, yeah, whatever. Let's just get this over with. Let's come to a consensus. And that's really the extreme form of what groupthink is about. Normally, it's just a subconscious thing that, you know, even when we're not fatigued or tired of the process, it's just we want to, as a human being, yeah, in a jury is a good kind of example, but not always. So we desire to have group harmony. And again, this is in general, I'm speaking in generalities. So somebody that's working in a group, we want everybody to work together well. So we want to have group harmony. And groupthink really is that need to come up with a consensus idea or solution, and that causes us, and it overrides our own common sense, our desire to come up with alternatives, and you might have an alternative, but your you won't say it out loud. You may not critique something because you're like, oh, okay, whatever. It's good enough. So you might not say, hey, there's problems with what you guys have come up with, what we've come up with. This is the problem. This is the problem. This is the problem. And that's going to start the whole thing over again. And then so we may have fatigue, and we don't want to start that whole process over again. Critique a position or have an opposing position. It's like at some point, okay, this is good enough. A lot of times groupthink is enforced or reinforced because one group feels that they're working against another group. And by the way, this is not just in small groups. So when we feel like we are part of a group, I'm trying to think of an example that won't get everybody all pissed off. So let's say that I'm in a group and, or I'm not in a group, but I feel like I'm part of a group. So I'm a part of a group. Oh, what the hell? I believe in social justice, whatever that is, right? So I'm for the Black Lives Matter movement. And again, this is just, I can't think of anything else for some reason. So this is not really my opinion. But if I'm in that group, right, I feel like that. I feel like I'm part of a group that is positive. I'm changing society for the better. And I am opposed to people who are in the opposite group. Now, I'm not sure there is an opposite group in this example, but let's just say that there was a group that did not believe that Black Lives Matter. I'm sure there is such a group, but I'm sure it's a very small minority. But we feel like we're working against that other group, and they feel like they're working against us, which causes us, okay, which causes both groups. And I'm not saying, that one is right or not right or whatever. I'm not making any judgments on it, on the group. But the point is that each group, each member of each group feels that because they're part of the group and they're working against the other group, that they need to be more uniform and that they can't criticize their own group. They can't bring up points that their group should think about, critique, come up with new ideas, come up with different ways. So there's a pressure that's felt to agree with everything that the group agrees with. And I'm putting quotations around the group because each group is made up of individuals. So there may be plenty of individuals that have details or things that they don't like about what the people in their perceived group are saying or doing, but they repress any need or want to speak out against those things or speak up for other ideas because the group has already decided what's correct or incorrect, right or wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that you can be part of a group and still be an individual. So I tend to think of myself as an individual first. I think we all do, but I tend to also behave as an individual first. And so I may say, hey, you know what? I believe in A, and I think that what these people are doing is good. But I always say, but What are, you know, that doesn't mean that the group that I feel a part of can be doing things that are wrong or that I disagree with. And so we have to and that's one of those traps. It's, again, how do we overcome that? How do we try to get rid of that groupthink mentality? How do we try to, I'm not saying that it's bad to be in a group. Groups are good. But in order to be as intelligent or as smart and make critical thinking decisions about problems in our society, problems in our lives, problems, you know, or solutions to things, to come up with things, we have to kind of actively avoid just falling in line always. So again, it's like what we talked about before. The mental fatigue thing with our brain happens because that's exactly what I'm saying, Alexander. Alexander, and I'll say it out loud. It seems that people are deterred from providing alternatives when the majority has already come to a consensus. And it doesn't even have to be the majority coming to a consensus. It could just be the loudest members of that group coming to a consensus. Yeah, I don't like to work in groups either. But think outside of the box and think of the groups that you are kind of in just because you believe something, or you believe some of the things that group, right? So so here's just an example off the top of my head that doesn't have to do with Black Lives Matter. If I say to you, are you an animal? Do you love animals? Are you an animal lover? Do you, and not in a weird way. So do you like animals? Most people will automatically say, yes. I am. Why? Because you want to be in that group, right? You want to be in the animal lover group. Nobody or hardly anybody will say, no, I hate animals. Because there's a perception that gets put on you if you say that. So if we took a poll for any class that I've ever taught in my life, and I said, do you like, maybe I don't even do it as strongly as an animal lover, do you like animals? I will guarantee that, you know, at least 97% of all of my students that I've ever taught would say yes. Why? Because if you're in that group of people who like animals, you have positive things associated with you. Whereas if you say, no, I hate animals, then you're in a group, a smaller group, you might not like animals, right? But you're going to be bunched in this other group, and you're going to have negative, or at least perceive the other people from the other group perceiving you as negative. So you have negative attributes associated with you. So that's called peer pressure to conform to the norms of a certain group for all kinds of different reasons. And one of them is those positive or negative associations that go along with being in a group. So let me see what people are saying in the chat room. Embarrassment is one of those negative connotations, right? So you may not like animals, but you're not going to say you don't like animals because it's embarrassing. Everybody else likes animals. I don't, you know, it's fine. I'll just go along with the group. As a group, we'd like to be open. Once you're enclosed in it, everyone seems to be closed-minded and just never works out. Well, it doesn't never work out. We don't want to be overly negative of groups, but you do. And here's my point. And give me 1 second. Let me finish this. Yeah. Again, anonymity is a big thing. Because if it's a survey, right? So I hand out a piece of paper, and nobody knows who's going to, who's answering it. And so it says, "Do you like animals?" you know, more people would say no than if I say, raise your hand if you don't like animals. Because then there's, people can identify who you are, and then there are negative connotations put on you. If it's anonymous, and I totally agree. Excuse me for 1 second. Somebody is doing something that's really loud in my house. And what they were doing was watching television. So I closed the door. Not my door, but the pocket door to the TV room. So anonymity, kind of in general, again, breeds more honesty. Having said that, Elizabeth made a very good point in the chat room. And that what happens is, as time goes on, groups tend to have less and less tolerance for new ideas. That's a symptom of groupthink. Critiques of, yes, it is mob mentality. Critiques of existing ideas. Hey, maybe we should rethink this position. And what's the third thing? How do I put this? They discourage people. They won't even listen to ideas that don't already match their own. So they discourage discussion of ideas. And as soon as you want to critique an idea that they have, they ostracize you from the group. So you kind of get kicked out because you're saying, hey, maybe we should look at this in a different way. Oh, well, then you're on the opposite side. You're working, you know, you're in the other group. And that is also a big deterrent to people speaking out, because they don't want to be in the other group, because we have two groups, or two perceived groups, that are working against each other. And you don't want to, because you disagree with a certain thing, or you think we should reevaluate one of our positions, you don't want to be automatically lumped into the other group. And so we just shut up. And so it really is important that we don't let the loudest people in a particular group dictate what everybody else is supposed to believe. So, and by the way, you don't have to be active in this. When you try to argue in the opposite, people quickly accuse throws. Yes. And that's a bad thing, actually. The pressure to just shut up, right? The pressure not to say anything. And I see in our society right now, and I'm not going to pick a particular topic or anything, but that there seems to be more intolerance of other people's views. So as people's position becomes more extreme, right? Or our positions are perceived, we perceive them as being more extreme. Now, okay, so let me put it this way. My position, I don't feel is extreme, but the people in the other group, I feel that their position is extreme. So they're really far away from me. I'm just normal, right? But the people over there, they have an extreme position. So I'm not even going to listen to any of their arguments. And more so than that, I want to censor. I want to make it hard for them to get their arguments out, their positions heard. I want to shut down discussion. And what ends up happening is it's not just for the group that's you think is the extreme group, or we think are the extremes, but what carries over is that even if one of our members, wants to speak out against something or try to shed light on something in a different way, or talk about something in a different way, they get immediately grouped into the extreme group, and therefore we don't even want to listen to what they have to say. We just go la, 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 like we're all 4 years old. The other thing that discourages, and that groups use in groupthink to discourage those kind of new ideas or differences is that I say something, for instance, like, if you are not an animal lover, you are immoral. You are evil. You are not a good person. And if I can group the other group into that kind of have those kind of labels on them, then I don't need to listen to what they say. Why should I need to listen to evil people say things? Their arguments are by default evil or immoral or uneducated or simplistic. So then I can feel free to go la, 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 and that only reinforces. If I only hear things that agree with my positions, it only reinforces my positions. So my point here is that once we're aware of this, once we understand how group, group dynamics works, we can actively use our brains and say, stop, wait a second, what is actually happening? Because we tend to be, there are certain things that I find that most people that I have experiences with are. One is we tend to be, and again, as a whole, we tend to be kind of lazy. Not only physically, but mentally. After a while, it takes too much out of us. I don't want to, and by the way, I don't want to argue political. I don't want to have political discussions constantly, hours and hours on end with people. My best friend is 180 degrees on most political stuff. Not everything, but on most everything. And I already know his positions, and I don't want to argue with him every time. We talk about other stuff. So we tend to be mentally lazy and physically lazy too. We'd much rather sit and eat potato chips and watch TV than mow the yard or paint the house, or, right? If given the choice, we'd all go, oh, you know what? Basketball playoff, well, not all of us, but playoffs are on. Let's watch that instead. Let's do that. Let's do the simple thing instead. I have to study for 4 hours because I have a test tomorrow. And so today I need to study for 4 hours. Or I could go to Disneyland and not study. I guess we can't, Disneyland is closed, right? So we can't do that, but pretend. I'd much rather do that. That's more fun. Not in Florida, really? So let's see, gaslighting, because those words are thrown, people normally don't want to be associated. In some cases, begs the question if there's people telling the truth. Yeah, and then once again, you can start making, if you're in a group, the loud people in the group can start making more and more extreme arguments, because as time goes on, the group solidifies. And so, and the need for individuals in that group to be part of that group and not get kicked out of the group or be seen to be outside of the group becomes stronger. So, and by the way, here's the other thing that happens. It's called the silent majority. We see this a lot now. there are a lot of people who just can't be bothered to argue anymore. I don't like group work. I don't like okay, let me put it this way. I don't like, in general, group assignments. The reason is because usually, let's say you have a group with 5 people, 2 of those people are going to work on that assignment really hard, and the others are going to tag along. And it may be that 1 or 2 people in that group aren't really going to do any work. They're just going to go, whatever you guys come up with. And that's because they're lazy and they don't want to, or they just don't care. And so in general, in school, I don't like group projects because it's really only a representation most of the time of, 2 or 3 of the people in the group, a smaller percentage of the group. And by the way, other people, again, this has to do with groupthink, and it has to do with the dynamics, group dynamics. A lot of times, maybe everybody wants to do the work, but there will be 1 or 2 people that kind of take the group over because they're the most enthusiastic. They're the loudest ones. They're the ones who dictate the direction of the group. And again, we tend to have fatigue. So I don't want to argue with this person all the time. So we tend to go, okay, whatever. It's not important enough to argue with. It's exhausting to argue with them constantly. And so you kind of end up going, whatever, I'll just go along. Hopefully we'll get a decent grade, blah, blah, blah. And so when you as a professor or as a teacher get the results of the group work, without even knowing it, you're probably only getting 1 or 2 people or 3 people out of the group, depending on how big it is. You're actually seeing their work, and that's what you're evaluating everybody on. Does that make sense? Yeah, by the way, the amount of group projects that are given is gigantic. And that's because there are positives to group work. And that's learning to work with others, because in the real world, you have to work with other people. So learning to work with others, trying to communicate with others, learning to communicate, blah, 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 is actually, those are positive things. So, damn it, I can't believe I didn't get through 2 pages of notes. So I know that it's overtime, so just give me like 3 more minutes, I'll be good. So let me go through of some of the symptoms of groupthink. So some of the things. Rationalization. So groups convince themselves that the decision or that the opinions that they represent are the best ones, even though there may be evidence to the contrary. All groups have a certain percentage of peer pressure, another symptom. And so members of a group will pressure or penalize team members who have different opinions or express concerns about whatever the group consensus seems to be. Groups also encourage complacency among most of the members of the group. So all the decisions are fine because nobody's kind of disagreeing in general. The moral high ground, which I just talked about. And this is very important to understand and to think about, especially in society groups, societal groups. And morality is used as a basis for decision making. That increases the pressure to conform, because no individual wants to be seen as being immoral, which is what I said. If I make a bunch of claims about, I could get 100% of my students to say they like animals, because all I have to do is make cases of how not liking animals is immoral, and then ask the question publicly, and you have to raise your hand, and then everybody will raise their hand, because that the pressure goes up once we start making moral judgments. Stereotyping is also part of a group. As the group becomes more cohesive and uniform in their views, or at least their perceived views, because of nobody speaking out against it, they see outsiders as inferior. And they use negative characteristics to discredit those who oppose them. And you can use negative examples. And then lastly, there's the illusion of unanimity, which uniform thought. Because nobody within the group is speaking out against it, against whatever it is, or raising new possibilities or new ideas. It doesn't always have to be a disagreement. It could just be, hey, you know what? I think, these are the 10 things that we believe in, and I think we need to rethink this one a little bit, because logically it doesn't work the way I don't think this, maybe we should reevaluate one of the positions. Well, because no one speaks out like that, because it's discouraged, because of the other reasons that I just went through, there's an illusion that everybody thinks the same. We all agree. And so that and that combined with peer pressure causes you to go, oh, well, then this one position that I think that we should reconsider probably is right. And so I'm just not going to say anything because all of the negative ramifications that are going to happen to me. So hopefully all of that stuff makes sense, and hopefully all of that can be used, and you don't have to use it constantly. You just need to kind of think of things, especially important things, not only individual decisions, but all of this groupthink. I see more and more groupthink in society as we move on, and less tolerance of people who have the opposing view, or have a view. It doesn't have to be, I always say opposing. It doesn't have to be opposing. It could just be a different view. You could agree on all of the basic stuff, but you might disagree on some things about how to get there. Or does that make sense? It doesn't always have to be a clash of views. So we have to be very careful about that. And the only way to combat this is to stop and think critically about what, we're kind of, a lot of times we just blindly go along with the group. And sometimes that's fine. But we shouldn't make a habit of doing that always. We should, and by the way, as you get older, your ideas and opinions and thoughts will become more formed. Because with time comes the luxury of looking at why you believe something. Because like I said, a lot of times we don't want to sit down and evaluate all of our opinions and think critically about everything at once, because it's fatiguing, it's tiring. But over time, we tend to do that naturally. And we go, hey, you know what? And so a lot of people change opinions that they had when they were in high school or in college as they get older, or they modify the opinions because of experience and the time to look at those things over and over again and revisit them. So hopefully all of that makes sense. Oh, what does this say? I don't want to say that I'm one of those loud voices, cause problems again, working in a group, everyone must remain open-minded. Yes. We should come to a consensus, and that consensus should be real. You can come to a consensus, but if you really are opposed to something, then you shouldn't go along with it just for the sake of going along with it. Like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. You lost me a little bit there, Eduardo. I'm not sure. how Martin Luther King and Malcolm X have to do with groupthink and critical thinking. But anyway, so there you go. That's today's lab. That's the lecture for the lab. So let me again remind you that on Thursday, I'll actually be giving you, we'll have a little bit of a lab lecture. We'll have a lecture, obviously, but we'll have a lab lecture, and then I will give you an assignment that you have to do. You're probably going to have a week to do it. So it's just a paper, and it's not going to be a, give me a 20-page paper on the Black Lives Matter movement and the opposing movement. It's not going to be anything like that, okay? It's going to be, it's going to be much simpler. So don't, yeah, that's what I said. Okay, yeah. Yeah, oh, I see. You're contrasting Malcolm X with Martin Luther King. Got it. Yes, yes. Same goals, different approaches. Yes, exactly. Thank you for clarifying that, because you lost me. So there you go. Unless you have questions or comments, I'll see you guys next week. I will stick around as usual. I will stop recording.